Hello and welcome to another episode of Lost Gotham TV. This episode we will be looking at reviewing the book The Woods Are Dark by Richard Laymon. Sorry, try to hold it a little better. I have two copies of this book because you may or may not know that there's actually two different versions of this book. So there are obviously different print releases of this book. This is the 1991 British edition from Headline, and it's not my favorite book by a long shot. It may in fact be my least favorite Laymon book. We'll find out at the end of all of these videos, by the time I've reread everything and everything's fresher in my mind, exactly which one earns the lowest spot. But The Woods Are Dark, definitely a contender for that. Now, the newer version of the book came out in 2008, and this is the restored and uncut edition. So, if you're looking to buy a copy, you can find an older one or you can get this newer one. There are several editions of the older version, and to the best of my knowledge, only really one version of this with it all together. There was a chapbook release of the missing chapters, the ones that were put into this book, which cover the character Launder Dills. Okay, kind of an unusual name. Not sure, again, if you're British or American, Lander. So that's kind of what the difference is between this book is, and I'll say in a minute, I'll kind of explain more of the differences a little bit without spoilers. But the basic story of the book is the same. Okay, it's about a small, I believe it's California town, where people go missing. The people that stop there on their way through, they tend to go missing. And you can tell by the cover, there's this little grove of trees. And it's only travelers that go missing. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm going by the back of the book to make sure I don't give anything away. Seized and bound, stripped of their valuables and shackled to the trees. And there's more, but so yeah, not my favorite book. I've said it before, I recommend anything that Laymon has written, but if you were going to skip one, this might be one to skip. But if it is one of his smaller books. But there are actually some interesting things about it, especially the fact that there are two different editions of the book. So, I don't know the exact story. Okay, maybe in layman's terms, it may explain something more about it. I have not read that yet. That's one of my newer acquisitions, and it's a huge book. It looks like a dictionary. It's so huge. And I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of fun reading it, and maybe it will explain about the story of what happened to this book, because just generally speaking, the story is that he wrote the book, publisher didn't like it, they asked him to strip a bunch of material out, which is the material that got added back into this version of the book, which covers exactly or in more detail what Launder Dills does while other things are happening, other chapters. And so when I sat down to read this version of the book, the newer uncut one, I was actually surprised. Yes, there are things put in there that are not in the original edition, but there's actually things missing from the uncut edition that are in this edition. Now, I didn't go back and reread this a second time more recently. I read this recently, then a couple of books later I read this. I haven't gone back and reread this to do a more in-depth comparison, but basically, even though the newer book, the 2008 book, is supposed to be uncut, there are things in this book that are not in this book. And there are things in this book that are not in this book. So it is a little confusing to me, and I'm not sure if perhaps when Richard Laymon was asked to remove the Landerdills chapters from the book, maybe he had to fill them with other chapters, which ended up in here, and so it made for almost two different stories, or at least two stories that have a major storyline that is different. And so, from a writer's standpoint, and from someone who has, gone to college and been taught to kind of analyze things a little bit more, I find it interesting that we have these two different books that are essentially the same story, but they're told differently. And I don't know. I mean, I wish there was a way, and again, I would need to reread this book to see what things were altered. But I wish that there was a way that both books existed in one. Yes, some changes would have to be made. But again, both editions of this book, it says about the 2008 book having like 50 extra pages of material, something like that. And I'm looking at it right now. I don't know about the exact formatting of things here. And at the back of this book also, there is actually a preview of a new copy of Beware, also coming sort of late in 2008. I don't know if that ever happened or not. I'd have to check my research notes. So anyway, this one, in terms of the Woods of Dark Uncut Editions, 215 pages. And according to the British edition, this one, making sure... Yeah, this one looks to be 247 pages. So the books are, the British edition slightly taller. You're talking millimeters, but it looks about the same thickness. So I don't know in terms of paper weight, the thickness of the pages, and the exact spacing of everything on the page. It's just very confusing that the uncut edition is seemingly many pages shorter than the original uncut edition. Wow, I'm repeating myself a lot. But I think it's an interesting point that needs to be made. So, now that I've rambled on a whole bunch about that, why don't I like the book? And which one do I prefer one over the other? So, the story is essentially the same, but the differences make some things better, but mostly not. The original edition, I don't like the way it begins, and I don't like the way it ends. Both the beginning and the end, for me, are too abrupt. And there's something to be said about trying to grab the reader right out of the gate, and having your story kind of start with a bang. But for me, it was not successfully executed. Now, obviously, this was only, one of his very first books. And so he hasn't yet, I've said this in other videos, he hasn't yet grown into the writer he would become. He's still maybe bowing a little bit too much to editorial pressure, things like that. But yeah, it starts with a bang, ends suddenly, and I didn't really love the beginning or the end. Now, the uncut edition does mix things up a little bit, and it starts the same, so again, not loving the opening, but it does end slightly differently. So obviously I can't talk about either ending in too much detail because I want to avoid spoilers. But yeah, suffice to say that I preferred the ending of the uncut edition, but neither book really scores high for me on my list of favorite books. Should you read it? For me, what are your reasons for reading it? If you want to read, if you want a quick little read, it's only 250 pages. And so it's going to be a quick read for you, For some quick readers, it might be an afternoon. For other people, it might be a weekend. But it's not his best. Yeah. Other people in other reviews that I've seen ragged on things like Beware. And I don't know. I think I prefer Beware to this book. That's my opinion, for what it's worth. So yeah, if you really like reading Laymon, you might enjoy this book. But if you have a choice between this and another book, and you just want something that you're going to sit down and enjoy, maybe pick the other book. The odds are good you're going to enjoy it more than this. Okay, I think I have beleaguered the point enough. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for watching the review. If you liked it or not, make sure and let me know with a like below. Make sure and give me a comment. If you have any suggestions for things that we can do in other future videos, or other authors you might want me to read after I'm done with Laymon. So that's it. I will let you go, but I will see you next time.